Hello, MAGFest. I'm surprised it's like the sleepy hour of when you have classes, so thank you for spending that time with us. Real quick, show of hands, who is this their first MAGFest? Welcome. We're so excited that you're here and that you're here to spend the afternoon with me. I'm Amy Lambas-Saracini, and
I'm Reese Saracini. You may be able to tell based on the names that we're married.
I know, cooties, right?
Yep.
But yeah, Reese and I actually met a long time ago when our backs didn't hurt as much in undergrad because we studied computational media together. And then we kind of have separate jobs where we do things tangentially related to what we studied, like a lot of people. But this panel kind of came about because these are the kind of things that we would talk about at the dinner table or with friends where it's like, so let's talk about how the medium is the message for whatever you've been playing recently. So that's kind of how this came about. So the structure of this panel we'll start with a brief history of pinball as we know it, just to bring you up to speed, haha. And then how the medium evolved, some important key points in evolution of technology, and then some ways that that technology was applied to pinball tables to, kind of make something more greater than the sum of its parts. And then some in-depth examples from some tables that Reese has curated from playing them on some platforms that we will give you resources for later. Quick warning before we get started, the second half of this panel does include flashing lights. So when we start talking about the more in-depth detail of the tables, we do have some videos that have some flashing lights, so just heads up for that. So let's talk about pinball as a narrative medium. So this is a useful definition we found in one of the books we did for research on this. Storytelling in pinball machines is the process of how the contents or the concepts, that's the game mechanics, the goals, the theming of pinball machines can be narratively charged, communicated, and received. So how do you make all these mechanical parts work together to not only make a fun game, but also to kind of tell a story while you're doing it? And this idea of affordances is something I would encourage you to keep in mind as we're talking about things. And this is characteristics or properties of an object that suggest how it can be used. So for example, buttons that are smoothed on the side of a machine with a little divot afford themselves to pushing them. It's very satisfying. Why is that? It invites you to come in and flip the buttons. Isn't that the most fun thing to do at a pinball table, even if you didn't put a quarter in? Or flippers afford striking things, but there was a pinball panel yesterday about how to advance your pinball game, where it's you can do more with flippers, you can pass the ball between them, you can really get an idea of finesse and control with the flippers. So the flippers have many affordances the better at the game you get. So pinball, as we know it, is kind of divided into three eras. There's pre-1935, that's pure mechanical. We're looking at stuff before electricity was introduced to any of the systems. Then we get to the electromechanical era. That's when things started getting complicated under the hood. We're starting to use things like solenoids and circuits and other things like that. And then in the 70s, with the rise of computing and cheap computing, we start to introduce solid state chips and things like that into pinball machines and realize, all right, we can make this thing as powerful as a personal computer if we want to. So starting from the very beginning, people have been playing, people as in usually the aristocracy, were playing yard games for a very long time. People just like to put balls in holes. So they were let's find more creative ways to do that. But in the 17th century, long games and billiards were adapted to tabletop form. If it was raining outside, or you didn't have a peasant to go and fetch all the balls and reset them every time, or you had to do it. So kind of the first form of identifiable pinball from these yard games is a game called bagatelle in the 1600s. The French aristocracy liked to play games, we know. And then in 1871, over the period of like a couple hundred years, people were iterating on this. There wasn't like an official one version of Bagatelle. It's kind of like whatever Louis XIV had in his basement. So people were iterating on this idea until another key point in this was this US patent granted to a British immigrant, Montague Redgrave, for a smaller tabletop game akin to Bagatelle. And the patent for this even says like improvements to the game of Bagatelle. This game introduces the spring launcher, playfield bells, and is considered to kind of be the beginning of modern pinball. Like this is that wheel carved out of stone. And then from there, David Gottlieb, if you hear the name Gottlieb, that was a big producer of pinball games, came up with Baffle Ball, which used coin operation, and added that to the pinball design language. Like from then on, you were pretty much paying to play pinball games. And then in 1934, you start to get games electrified, which greatly enhance the amount of things you can do with a pinball table and all the other mechanical things that are already there. So that provided lighting as well as mechanical elements. Harry Williams Pinball, is the first to use electric components called solenoids to move the ball and make sounds by hitting bells. So solenoids are essentially like state machines where you have like a metal rod and it's surrounded by a wire that you can magnetize to make it be in like one state or another. So you can imagine how that can be like you can complete the circuit, electrify it to flip a flipper or ding a bell or do something like that. Now that you have like these small state machines that you can sprinkle around the bottom of the table, you can do a lot with that. In addition to that, in the 1930s, we get glass added over the playfields because they were coming out and hitting people, you were losing them. Like now you had a more confined space, but that also meant like, oh, we can make the ball go faster now that it's not gonna like bing somebody in the eye. That is where the fun is. I know, safety is just, it ruins everything. So it keeps the ball from escaping the cabinet, also allows for play fields that afforded, faster, different kinds of ball movement.
Yeah, so you'll note also that we haven't invented the flipper yet. So at this point, pinball is more so like pachinko, where you're basically just plunging a ball into a board and it bounces around, hits some pins, and falls into a hole that, indicates a score.
Yeah, a lot of times like people are like jostling the thing if it's, it's heavy, but like people were doing that from the very beginning. And later that's why tilt function was introduced. And then legs were added to save counter space because it used to take up real estate on the counter. But then once you add legs to it and have it as a freestanding thing, then it's like, oh, the local drugstore, they don't have to use counter space. This space is for all the pinball stuff over here so customers can come in and just play. So here we have some images. Like that first one is a Bagatelle variant from like 1750 to 1770. That one does have some form of spring power ball launcher, but it's very rudimentary. And then the middle is patent documents for Redgrave's patent for improvement to Bagatelle, that kind of first like pinball game that we have. And then Gottlieb's Baffle Ball, which we mentioned, which 10 shots for 1 cent, also made for 5 cents play. So that thing was eating coins. So the investment was like, if you had a business or a public place like a bar or any other place of ill repute, you could install one of these machines and it would pay for itself eventually. And then we get into the electromechanical era. So we kind of, in the 30s, we're talking about electrifying things. Now you're cooking with not gas, electricity. So in 1935, the back box is added. That's the part, that's the back of the table that like right now you would see your score show up there. That's basically like the poster board and what you're seeing that advertisement of like, come over here and play some pinball. Why don't you wanna, play this thematic pinball based on sports or something like that. So yeah, the back box was, earn the points, win the game, yay sports. The backboard was not only a way to entice people and to invite people to come in and play the game and give an initial idea, including narratively, of like, if you had a metaphor for the game, what is it about? it also, frees up some of the space on the more bare play field where it's like we can show essentially our UI up here, and we can do all of our controls and game mechanics down here. So now you're working with a whole nother piece of space. And then in 1936, the term pinball is kind of starting to circulate more, and that's what people understand, that these machines are generally called pinball machines. And to your point, like initially they were from those pachinko-like games where the ball would go in where the pins were, and that was the origin of the term pinball. And then there was as there is with many games, there's always a cultural backlash. So in the 40s, New York City enacted this pinball ban, saying that it was a moral panic and think of the children and all things we certainly have never heard before. And those pinball bans were led by Mayor LaGuardia before he became an airport. But yeah.
Yeah, so 1942 is significant because there was a big surge in pinball play in the 30s because it was the Great Depression. And this was something cheap that people could do to distract themselves from the fact that everything is on fire, much like today.
So, yeah, it was something that people are spending time doing this, but thousands of machines were destroyed. Some of them were even dumped in the Hudson River. I tried to find information on if those machines are still there, like if it's a marine sanctuary, like LaGuardia Marine Sanctuary. I could not find anything, so if somebody finds it, please ping me. We have contact info at the end of the panel. And then pinball shrank due to the war on gambling, but like any kind of hobby, there's always people who keep it alive. It survived and it evolved, and that's kind of the cyclical story of pinball. The rise and fall of pinball over time is it reaches a struggle, it evolves to kind of adapt to that new gaming ecosystem and cultural ecosystem. Like, you see that kind of a couple of times happen. You could argue that happens with video games too, like with the video game crash and how it rebuilt itself over time. And then from there, this is where our beloved flippers come in. In 1947, Gottlieb's game Humpty Dumpty implemented flippers. The flippers were kind of arranged in a weird format, not as you would see, and there were like 6 of them. It was kind of a funky machine, but this is the first recorded instance of using flippers. So now users have additional means of controlling the ball besides physically nudging the table and using the spring launcher. Now this is really becoming a more accessible game of skill. And then Triple Action was the first game to feature just 2 flippers at the bottom of the playing field. So you can see how the design is like iterating, and then it converges, and then everybody is starting to kind of use that standardized pinball language where it's like you have the 2 flippers at the bottom with the gutter that's infuriatingly just big enough to lose the ball at the bottom, and facing each other. Because initially, you had machines where they were facing away, people were experimenting with that, and then we kind of got to this point of confluence. Let's see. And then in 1976, a couple things happened, kind of what you were alluding to, Reese, where it was like this clampdown on stuff and people saying it's a game of gambling and gambling is illegal here. There was a big court case. There was actually a documentary about it recently where Roger Sharp, this just good pinball player, came into the courtroom and proved that pinball was a game of skill and therefore did not apply to these gambling bans. And from there, pinball was kind of made legalized, and it was really, New York was like a really big example, so other cities kind of started to follow their example. So that was really when pinball kind of came back into good graces. Yeah, and then toward the second half of the 70s, we start to get microprocessors, and that opens up the field even more of what we can do.
So before we get into the microprocessors, if you want to see how an electromechanical pinball table works on the inside, there's a YouTube channel called Technology Connections. He has a video about a pinball table, and it's terrifying. I can't even imagine trying to build one of those at the time.
He had 2 videos on that, and I tried to watch it when I was too sleepy, and I was like, this is not like a 10 p.m. YouTube video for us. That'll be linked in the resources later as well, because we highly recommend that. So here's some images of LaGuardia taking a sledgehammer to machines, dumping them in the river. A lot of this was a publicity stunt. Boo! But yeah, it's a tale as old as time. Games are corrupting people and the youth and the working class because, the landed gentry were playing all these long games and bagatelle before. But it is kind of funny how when games became more democratic that it was like, well, people are wasting their time and money on these things. And then we get to the solid state era, which is, computers are just getting into everything, including pinball, especially with, you've got pinball machines living side by side with arcade machines in arcades. In 1976, microprocessors were added as solid state electronics. The Spirit of 76 table by Microgames is the first one credited with using this. But the technology hit mainstream pinball with Hot Tip by Williams in 1977. There's a lot of suggestive pinball names. And then in 1979, Williams releases Gorgar, which there's a table downstairs in the arcade of this. It's the first table to use synthesized speech where it would procedurally string together just a limited vocabulary of 7 words, like Gorgar beat you, and Gorgar eat pinball or whatever. I don't know what the 7 words are, but you should go downstairs and play and figure out what those are. And then, as I said, pinball coexists with video game cabinets in arcades for a time. They kind of see a decline with rising popularity of video games, especially with home consoles, as they start to draw people away from those public third spaces where people are coming to play shared games. And there's another resurgence in moral panic because y'all know what happened in the 70s and 80s where it's like video games, not just pinball and their friends' video games are corrupting the youth, and think of the children. But, nevertheless, pinball persisted. In 1980, we get a bunch of cool new mechanics introduced. Black Knight, which I'm not sure if that one's downstairs. That one's a really good one. You see a lot of places. That employs a 2-level playing field connected with ramps. So now you're working with whole different levels. You got fun slides to go down. It's awesome. The game Firepower introduces multi-ball mode, which is a staple in the pinball lexicon to this day. Just about every pinball game I can think of employs multi-ball in some way. And then in 1986, we start to get more narrative exploration. Tables up to this point had theming, but it was mostly cabinet art or spell the letters for something. There's a table called High Speed, also downstairs, by Williams that's considered the first table to use this language and affordances of pinball to construct a narrative, not just a theme. It's really interesting. This was inspired by a true story, kind of the designer Ritchie's experience getting chased by the cops in California for excessive speeding on California's I-5. So, the whole idea of the game is you're trying to, isn't it, you change the lights and then you have to be able to drive through and
evade the cops.
Yeah. So that one's a fun one too. And then in 1991, the game Checkpoint uses a dot matrix display on the glass. So you see that monochrome kind of sepia toned, light bright kind of system. The stuff that artists are doing with the dot matrix system is still amazing. What you can do with just dimming a couple and bringing some up, just much more creative expression. And then 1992, we get the still best-selling pinball table in history, the Addams Family table. That's right. It sells over 20,000 units. In 1994, Williams commemorated this benchmark with a limited edition of 1,000 Addams Family gold pinball machines, featuring gold-colored trim and updated software with new game features. So that one's also a staple. It's a really fun table. And then in 1999, we get Revenge from Mars, also downstairs, which uses projected video display to create composite image play fields. So you have the play field and then you have the backboard, but then you get projections on that, so you get like this AR layer over what you're doing, where it looks like the ball is striking virtual objects. I know really it's not there, but it's still really freaking cool. Also, the aliens just look fun. But despite these advances in technology and narrative expression, pinball did see another decline in the late 90s. In 2000, Stern Pinball was the only pinball manufacturer in the United States. And they mostly survived by focusing on licensed properties and things that people recognized. They made some great tables with that, but that definitely limited the number of like independent thematic tables and stories that they could tell. So it was interesting to see, like, there's a lot of tables of licensed things where it's like, how do you tell the story but in a different medium, like a lot of movie tables. And then you get a resurgence in the 2010s. The online community really comes together. People are finding each other online. They're giving each other tutorials. They're setting up tournaments. There's a real homebrew resurgence of pinball thanks to facilitation from the internet. And then in 2013, the Wizard of Oz table is the first US pinball machine to use an LCD screen. And that table, like on its own without the LCD screen, is gorgeous, but they just add a whole nother dimension to it, and a lot of other tables have followed suit. So these are some other examples from this time. Xenon in 1980 is the first talking pinball table by Bally. They had a female music composer who composed the special effects and did the sound effects. And I have linked in the resources a quick documentary about how she put that together. It's really cool. And then Orbiter 1, I think we saw this one in Chattanooga, right? That one's like, the play field is just molded plastic, like a crater surface, like a meteor surface. It's wild. It's very cool. If you see that table, I don't know how you deal with strategy on that, but it's just fun. And then Bonsai Run, saw this one at the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester. Has a continued play field and flippers in the back box. So you send you reach certain qualifiers in like the race, and then you get to do this whole other vertical race course on the backboard. It's insane. It like doubles the play field size. It's really cool. So yeah, new technologies developed and were applied to pinball tables for various purposes, like extending play, making gameplay more fun, attracting players. We talked through some of those technological leaps in pinball's history and kind of the nascent ideas of theming and then starting to tell a story and navigate a narrative space with that. So the questions now are, how are these technologies applied to pinball and make it a storytelling medium? What are those affordances? All about evoking ideas and themes and reinforcing them through gameplay and thematic events. So we'll start going through a couple of like slice examples, and then we'll do some deep dives with some tables that we picked out. So, illustration is probably the first thing you notice about a pinball table, and rightly so. A lot of tables have a lot of design hours put into them, and there's some really gorgeous art. The backboard, the initial idea was to attract players, but then people realized, well, we don't have to just attract players, we can fit in elements of the UI and extend the storytelling and the theming up here. So backglass art, was originally used for that. And it's most readily facing passerby at an approximate eye level. So that is usually the first part of the pinball table you see. You have to approach it to then look down at the playfield. The functional thumbnail image and preview of the table that you see below. The cabinet on the sides can also do this, but it's a little lower in most people's field of vision, and also if you have a row of pinball tables, it's going to be harder to see that cabinet art. It's easier to see that art if it's like one or two machines that are in a place, but if you have like a whole pinball arcade, which we're really lucky to have, it's harder to see that, except for the end cap ones. So for this example, this is one of my favorite tables. It's Whirlwind. The whole idea is you are storm chasing. It's essentially Twister, but not the licensed version. Well, it's some kind of a storm. And then integrating theme, form, and function. So the ways that illustrations are placed is intentional on the table. The whirlwind, you have a directional compass in the middle, like you're reading like where the forecast is. Things will like different directions will light up and tell you like where the wind is blowing. The center of the play field, that's central to understanding weather patterns and where they're happening, drawing on wind gusts for like a bunch of the different pathways, so it's like the ball is being caught up in them. Lightning, clouds swirling, the tubes are clear so it looks like an airstream. This does a really nice job visually tying together pieces and parts of the table in a cohesive whole, like it's a whole circulation system. And it guides users' gaze to points of interest on the table and convey those themes. Like your eye is kind of drawn to different paths, like that's very intentional. And then the back glass frames elements that should receive attention, like scores, ball number, name of the game. And then table elements provide narrative gameplay meaning to things like when the storm picks up, you're directed to seek shelter in an underground bunker. So that's labeled on there. And then the capsule encapsulates everything and continues the theme. So you have everything kind of on the surface of the table, and then it kind of surrounds out. It's a really nice kind of encapsulated world, like a Mighty Max or a Polly Pocket. And then encoding different information, narrative info like characters, settings, locations, things, story prompts. Like these characters on the backboard are the ones that are telling you, oh, looks like rain, there's a storm a-coming, and stuff like that. And then gameplay info, user guidance like shoot here, information like points and areas of the play field, directions you should go, places you should emphasize at different times. And then this idea of kinetics and haptics, this is kind of why this is one of my favorite tables, is because it has a built-in fan that once you start approaching the storm, the fan kicks on, which is really, really cool. So I really appreciate tables that have extra bells and whistles with haptics of like, we are translating this as a multi-sensory experience with just mechanical parts. So there's inherent haptics, which are things like that all pinball tables have. Those are mechanical components that are inherent tactile properties by virtue of the medium. So that's the ball colliding with elements, like a metaphor for like rumbling thunder and like generating that noise, or like things banging around because there's a storm going on. Ball flying through the clear tubes akin to being blown around in an air current, like you're being swept around. You are debris in the storm, but you're also trying to, navigate that because you're a storm chaser and you're trying to document this and make your way through it. So you're not just running away from the storm, you're very purposeful in how you go it, but it's kind of fighting you. The narrative, some tables have more than others, like the whirlwind fan, the twister table downstairs has this feature. As the storm picks up, the game ramps up, you start getting thunder, lightning, stuff like that. But even, the vibrations of like the table hitting, it's almost like you're creating your own thunderstorm in a box. And then audio, we touched on this a little bit. There's those artificially added sounds like music and fanfares, things that are like introduced artificially to the machine, designed on purpose. Adding to the feeling experience, but also providing the player with non-visual cues about status and progression, because your eye is on the ball. You can't, you can glance up at different things, but audio is also a very important part of pinball because it's conveying information on what your game state is, what's going on, what pathways are open now, multi-ball is coming, all these things. As far as narrative, like, are you progressing? You're on a roll when the music kicks in, when the thunder and lightning go off. Sound effects, things like that, giving that atmospheric experience. And then more direct feedback on the state of the playfield. You can, with your stereo ears, you can hear where the ball is in the game space. So that's feedback, that's valuable feedback. Speech, not every table has this, but kind of more and more do. Convey story beats as well as player instructions, give illicit feedback, give some sense of urgency. Like in this one, it's like, danger, return to your homes, the storm is coming. Uh-oh, looks like rain. And then noise is inherent to the physicality of the game. That's physics, the ball striking things, the flippers flipping, all the mechanical parts moving, all that good stuff. And then lastly, interaction design. So exploring the art, the sound, the light, movement of the ball, the topography of the play field, all to convey meaning and provide metaphors. So these comprise the framing within the game events stringing events into a story and a narrative. So the ball is your avatar in this space. It can represent a character, a player avatar, a concept like a story object or another thematic element. For example, there's a fun Hot Wheels table where it's like the ball is essentially a Hot Wheels car, and you can pick out which car you are on the UI, but like you are driving the car through the track. Checkpoint, High Speed have those car metaphors. Those are different driving experiences, but they all kind of feel different, and they're all themed differently, and there's different things that happen. Whirlwind, the ball is your storm chasing the vehicle, going through flows of air tubes, storm cellars, all kinds of stuff. And then the coding objectives are kind of help drive you to unlock some of those narrative elements and start building the story and keep going. Give the player tangible goals, a foundation upon which the theming gives a narrative meaning. How do you describe what happens in a game of pinball? It's like describing what happens in a video game. You don't usually say, I did this, and then I did this, and then this happened, as like, well, I walked this many feet, and I picked up this object, and it added exactly this much to my inventory, and I got this many points. You were like, I went over here, and I fought this thing, and it was real hard, and I did it, and it was really cool, and then all this other stuff. So like with Whirlwind, the way I would describe it, like if I was talking about how far I got in the game, which is not far, I would say, the storm approached and it picked up and the wind started picking up and I was really trying to chase the storm, but the directions kept changing and I was starting to get a little panicked because I felt like I was out of control, but I had to head to the cellar because otherwise the storm was going to overwhelm me, which happened. So like that is one narrative arc where it's like, that happened and that ended with me not making it to the cellar and getting blown away.
Okay, so at this point we're gonna do some deep dives on a few different tables that we just think are cool. Honestly, I would say the real title for this panel is just Marge Simpson going, I just think that's neat. So we're going to look at 4 tables in detail, kind of arranged in order of how wild is it that they're telling this narrative through the means of pinball. And keep in mind with all of these that there's really only one thing happening in pinball. It's a ball's hitting a thing. It's hitting a flipper, it's hitting a spinner, it's hitting a bumper. A ball's hitting a thing. That's all it is. But we're going to be able to do all of this cool stuff with just that mechanic. So the first thing we're looking at is NBA Fast Break. So this is downstairs. And what's cool about this is it's just basketball. It's not basketball themed, it is basketball. So this was made by Bally, came out in 97, about 4,000 units created.
And I like how it features the voice of Tim Kitzrow, who's famous for boom shakalaka and things like that. Like, yeah, exactly. Like, if you really start getting the machine going, you're going to be able to hear him basically broadcasting your basketball game.
Mm-hmm. So this is really the main component of the NBA Fast Break table. It's this hoop and all of these ramps that lead to this hoop. Unlike most pinball tables where the score is always some unit of hundreds or thousands or millions, the scoring in this game works like real basketball. You're only going to get 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, depending on the action you take. So there are a couple different ramps that you can use to go either directly up the middle or around the edges to get a 3-pointer. But there's also this ring kind of in the middle where there's a couple little divots and bars leading you into the goal. That's where you get your 2 points. And what's interesting there is that there's a little mechanical defenseman that goes back and forth that tries to block your shot. So if you end up in that area, you have to hit one of the flipper buttons to toss the ball to the next person and try to get it in without the defenseman stopping you. What's also interesting from a kind of parallels to real basketball perspective is that the 3-pointer can be a riskier move than just the standard 2-pointer because this ramp, I don't know if you can actually see the mouse. Oh no. The ramp that's at the front of the picture, that is smack dab in the middle of the table. So it's something that you can conceivably go into and get 3 points reliably, but if you're not good at making the shot and you don't get it all the way up the ramp, it will come back down and almost always just drain directly out of the board immediately. So you gotta do a risk-reward analysis with it to determine if it's worth, trying to get the 3 points.
Trivia game.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. There's also a NBA trivia minigame built into the table, which is fun. You can get some points for that, which obviously is not part of real basketball, but,
I mean, that's a lot of what commentators talk about, though, during a basketball broadcast. And I also think that, this is the trivia and then the theming, and, you can pick what team you play at the beginning is a nice, interesting time capsule or slice in history, because, you can play as the Seattle Supersonics in this game before they moved to Oklahoma City. Or I think, doesn't it also have, the Vancouver Grizzlies before they moved to Memphis? So, it's a slice of sports history as well. And the Washington
Yes.
Bullets, all these
yeah.
different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like Bonsai Run, which we saw earlier, there's also a interactive backboard on this table. So there's a little side ramp on the table, which is basically themed kind of like a snack bar. And there's a mode where if you activate it and you get the ball in there, you go into a minigame in the backboard where there's a flipper in the bottom right and a net in the top left. And you have to try to flip a ball into the net to get bonus points, which can be pretty lucrative if you have good timing, but if not, you're just kind of doinking it around awkwardly for 30 seconds.
Well, the fact that you have to go through the snack bar to get there reminds me of those weird interstitial fan games that they have at basketball games where it's win a t-shirt if you can get this many free throws.
Yeah, so with the I can't talk. So like Amy mentioned before, you have all of the actual NBA teams in this table. When you start playing, you have to pick which team you're playing as. So, you get your whole kit and caboodle, so no matter what market you're in, you can play, I live in New York, I can beat the Knicks, or we live in Atlanta, so we can play the Hawks, and then lose every time. But you also have actual players that are on the team that are represented as part of that, and as you're playing, the table will say the names of those players and call out when they're performing actions. And depending on what action you're taking, you can also get these cool little interstitial animations on the display. Like here we've got a guy dribbling and then he throws and makes the basket. What's also very cool about that is that there's not a high score on the table. The high score is per team. So you can have up to 30, it might have been 29 at the time, different high scores depending upon who you're playing as. All right, then we've just got a little video of
basketball, and you can pick any of the NBA teams, including one that no longer exists, the Seattle Supersonics. Off we go. Right at the beginning of the game, if you shoot that center ramp, you will get one of the 4 combos. It's a bunch of times in this game, rounds will just kind of begin for you, and the half-court hoops round has begun, and we got that by hitting enough bumpers. Half-court hoops is a center ramp shot round, and during half-court hoops, every center ramp shot is worth 3 points instead of its normal 1. So it is valuable to play out these modes. Oh yeah, no, I'm not. That was made. That was at the buzzer. You get those hoops modes by hitting bumpers. So every time you get the chance to, if you just shoot up the middle, take a free throw, you will get some bumpers, and eventually you will get one of the modes. So let's just shoot up the middle here. Take a free.
Okay, so the next table we're going to look at is called the Champion Pub. This is so cool. This is the coolest thing ever. The first time I played this was with my buddy Clay, who's out there somewhere, at the Seattle Pinball Museum. So the theme of this table is that you go into kind of a rough and tumble bar, like the 1920s, and you get into a boxing tournament. And what you're trying to do is train and go through a series of fights to become the champion and win the jackpot.
It's rocky, but not in Philadelphia.
So what I think is super cool about this table is in order to start a fight, you have a little life bar for yourself, and then your opponent will have a life bar. And to fill up the life bar, you have to train. And there's a couple different ways you can do that. You can hit this heavy bag in the middle of the table, but there's also little interstitial mini games at the top of the table on the left and right that represent a jump rope and a speed bag. So with the speed bag, there's this little cup and the bag in the back, and as you hit the flippers, little fists punch the ball, and you try to keep it in that area for as long as possible, hitting the bag. And then with the jump rope, the ball goes into a little divot, and there's a bar that spins around. And when you hit the flipper, it makes the ball bounce up, and you try to jump over the rope. But the speed will vary as you go to try to trip you up. Boom. So once you fill up your health, you can activate one of the fights. And how that happens is that the heavy bag rotates, and on the back of the bag is just this big dude with a mustache. So at this point, it just turns into Punch-Out. You can either hit the ball right in the middle and hit him in the gut. There's little ramps on the sides where you can get kind of jabs to the left and right of him. And there's also a ramp that you can hit up to get a critical hit on him that does extra damage. But the longer you go on, the more your HP drains. So if you take too long to beat him, then you'll lose the fight. You need to start again from the beginning.
There's also a way to just get an automatic KO
Mm-hmm.
get enough if you get the correct range shots.
Yep. There is an auto KO like Big Mac's Final Smash. Or Little Mac. He should be big. He turns into Big Mac.
Look, he's Big Mac in heart.
He is.
Across a couple specific ramps and successes,
to-
and then you get the next
scroll
shot.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So there are a number of different boxers you can fight, just like Punch-Out. Unfortunately, just like Punch-Out, there are also mostly offensive stereotypes. So you've got your drunk Irish guy, you've got your, Chinese guy with the hat and the mustache, like a suave Italian man. So, yes. All right, and here's just some examples of some of the items that pop up on the display. So here's our little, graphic for our boxer that we're fighting. And then in addition to the primary fight, since we're in a pub, we have a poker mini game, which you play to get some points, and also a spittoon mini game, where you have to move the pot back and forth while people are spitting, get some points. Don't make a mess. You have anything you want to say about it?
No, I think this was one of the first tables you showed me, because when you got back from that trip and you were like, hey, all you people, this table, and that really got me interested with all these different mechanics, especially the jump rope one. That was wild to me.
Yes, I think the jump rope mechanic is what made me like pinball, honestly. It's so neat. If anyone wants to play this, I don't think we have it here currently, but it is on the Zen Pinball collection on, I assume, every system. I've got it on Switch, but it's on PlayStation, PC, the whole shebang.
It was here a year or two ago.
I think you're right. All right, so we got a little clip for this as well.
You won, kid! Hey, come on! I don't have any life! Flip, kid, flip!
Yeah, so here you're going back into training mode, because your guy is always illustrated there, but it's is he facing the challenge of the training or facing the challenge of fighting somebody?
All right!
Yeah, there's the jump rope.
Pound those flippers! Kid! Kid! Way to go!
I also appreciate how, a lot of these, for research, we played the digital version. They tried to stay as faithful to the physics of the original table as possible.
Ladies and gents, Petrotsky Yermidov voices the kid. I will not stop until you are totally annihilated. You can't hurt me! Punch his face! Give it to him! I knew you could do it! I have failed the motherland! Extra ball!
So something else that I love about this table is, you may have noticed between the flippers at the bottom during the fight, it was flashing red. So there's a little cylinder that pops up that doesn't entirely prevent the ball from draining during the fight, but mostly does, because the point is the fight. You can really usually only drain when you're training. So I think that's nice that it's just, being a little more fair to the player, letting them focus on the actual objective.
It's definitely a creative use of like the mechanical bits where it's like we're not just playing pinball, it lends to the narrative.
All right. The next table is called Who Done It, and this is a murder mystery told solely through the mechanics of pinball. Basically how this works is that the game takes place in a casino. There's a murderer, and you're, of course, you kind of generic gumshoe guy who is called in to investigate and solve the murder. There's actually a very extensive backstory for this table. There are a few different characters involved. We've got Nick Spade as our detective, Trixie, who's one of the dealers in the casino, Tony, the casino owner, Bruno, the bouncer, Victoria, who's like a mysterious femme fatale from Europe, and her butler, who is secretly her father, who's pretending to be her butler so he can get revenge on the owner of the casino for betraying him in the past, and it's preposterous how much is going on in this
There is
table.
drama in pinball. It is spicy.
So how this game works is that you're trying to gather clues, so you can do kind of like a what is the name of that like board game where you've got the cards of people's faces?
Clue.
No, the one like Guess
Shoot-
Who.
yeah.
Yes, it's kind of a Guess Who situation. So in the middle of the table, there's a little quarter pipe, and it goes up into a ramp that splits into three. This is the primary way you navigate the casino. If you go to the left ramp, you go down the elevator to a previous floor. If you go to the right ramp, you go up a floor. And if you go to the middle ramp, you get off on that floor. And then there's different activities that you can do on each floor. Some of them have different mini games. Some of them are floors where you can get clues, or do a multi-ball. There's also kind of a elevator madness mini game where it's just kind of flinging you all up and down. So once you find enough clues, you're able to hit this telephone prop, and then you can interview someone and get some information from them to help you determine who might be the perpetrator. Then once you get enough clues, you can go to a specific floor and then guess, from a selection of player portraits that pop up on the screen, who you think is the killer. And if you get it wrong, you just keep playing until you can try again. If you get it right, you activate a mode where you have to capture them before you can proceed. There's also a little roulette table over here, since you're in a casino. If you hit the ball in there, you can activate a mini game where you can bet up to all of your points. I think there might be a cap of like 2 billion or something. But so if you get it right, good for you. If not, then you lost a whole lot of progress. There's also a functional slot machine in the middle of the table under that ramp that you can use to get clues or extra points as well. And then here's just a couple of the little animations that pop up on the display. Here's our first-person view of someone stabbing the victim. Very giallo film. Here we've got a portrait where we're interviewing the butler, asking for information about Tex. And then every time you go to a different floor, we get this little animation of kind of an old-fashioned elevator arrow showing you which floor you're going to. All right, and here's some gameplay.
why, but Tex and Tony acquired matching tattoos.
I love how the dot matrix display is also not just like, we're shifting to this scene and this scene, and it's not like jump cuts, it's a continuous animation sequence.
Hold it, kid.
We also have this great animation of you chasing the perpetrator across the roof past the giant sign, which is chef's kiss. Yours doesn't? Oh.
Important news, this is multi-ball.
Not yet. Yes, yeah. So when you catch them, that activates a multi-ball, and then you can see there's little portraits down at the bottom that'll light up or not light up as you've engaged with different characters and caught different people. You would think there was only one murder, but the game must go on, so you kind of just keep going through case after case until you've run the gamut.
Kind of like how we use for a Blizzard mode that the games are just in a set.
Yep.
Is the killer different each time?
It does vary, yes.
So the killer is different every time, so that lends to the replayability where it's like you don't know exactly, like you still have to piece the puzzle together each time. It's like every time you play Clue, it's not always going to be the same person.
All right, then we've got one more that we're going to focus on. So this one, you may know from such platforms as every platform ever made in history since 2011. It's on your toaster, it's on your fridge, it's on your toothbrush. It's Skyrim. This is not a Skyrim-themed pinball table. This is Skyrim. This is a whole RPG in a pinball table. I'm just going to have to read some of the script for this one because it's just, there's so much going on. The caveat here is that this is a digital pinball table, but it does abide by the rules of actual pinball. There's a sub menu where you can go in and mess with inventory and stuff, which would probably require an extra button on a real pinball table, but otherwise it is standard pinball mechanics. All right, so the goal of this table is to explore the world of Skyrim freely or embark on a series of quests to save it from the menacing return of the great dragon Alduin, the World Eater, who has prophesied to destroy the world of Skyrim, Tamriel, and beyond. So how this works is that there is both a main quest and side quests in this game that you can complete to proceed. There's also character creation. When you start the game, you pick what race you are, you pick what class you are, and then there's a representation of your character standing on the side of the screen the whole time. You can go to shops, you can find chests, you get money, you have a weight limit in your inventory. All of these things impact your stats. In the bottom left, you can see there's a couple bars. There's your health, your stamina, your magic on a pinball table. Whenever you get new gear, you can go into your inventory and equip it, and it shows up on the character model. It'll swap out the armor, what weapon you're using. If you're using magic, their hands will catch on fire, or whichever magic you're using. There's potions, healing spells, the whole shebang. It's it's so ridiculous.
So if you thought you've beaten Skyrim on every platform, you have homework to do.
Yes. What's cool about this is that it also saves your progress between plays. So if you get a game over and you start again, it'll prompt you, do you want to continue playing as your level 5 Khajiit bandit or whatever you're playing as, and then you can keep going from where you started. So here we've just got kind of a screenshot with our guy, who you can see now has kind of the traditional Skyrim box art armor and a sword and a shield. We're confronting a dragon that's popped up in a side quest. So we've got to manage our HP, our MP, There's also melee, ranged, and magic weapons. If you run out of health, you don't get a game over from the pinball table. It just kicks you out of your current mode, so your side quest, main quest, whatever, and then you have to restart it. So it's not super punishing, but worth keeping an eye on. And then here we can see some of the myriad text boxes that'll pop up. So we've got, you found this novice magic robe. Do you want to take it? You can join guilds that all impact your stats, like how many points you get from hitting a bumper, or how much damage you do in combat, things like that. You can also go stay in an inn, because there's a day-night cycle in this pinball table, and the shops will close and different activities will happen at different times of day. So sometimes you need to stay at the inn to speed up the clock. It's preposterous. I will say, do all these things make it a better pinball game? Arguably no. It's a lot to keep up with. It gets rid of the natural boon of pinball, that it's something that can be played by anyone, even if they don't know all the rules necessarily. This one has a lot of junk to sift through, but if you think that's fun, like I do, it's there to sift through. And then here's our
Hey,
clip.
you're finally awake. Who are you? You picked a bad time to come home to Skyrim. You gained a new ability.
Yeah, I feel like a good description of the way you the way you described enjoying pinball is like you have to have an appreciation for a level of camp.
What in oblivion is that?
And this is like
Dragon! Let's go, friend. Move! Try to avoid his flames!
Yeah, so if you hit the ball through the fire, you'll take damage. And then you'll have to use a potion or a healing spell or go to the inn to heal. And I don't know if you noticed that the plunger is a dragon breathing fire at the ball. It's ridiculous. I love it so much.
it's hot, sweet garbage, and we love it so much. It's most polished ever.
This is also in that Zen Pinball collection online. Specifically, and it's in a set with a Fallout table and a Doom 2016 table. So if this is interesting, there's more nonsense where this game from.
Move! Try to avoid his flames! Grab this weapon and let's move. The dragon is burning everything to the ground.
Yes. Yeah. It's a very different feel than a traditional pinball table for sure.
See that? Guards. Maybe we can reason with them. Hold on now. We only want skill increased. If they don't want to negotiate, so be it.
There's also a lot of different enemies that'll pop up in that middle area. There's spiders, there's bandits, there's skeletons.
Crabs?
It's so great. I'm not sure if there's crabs. I'd have to double check. I hope so. Giant enemy crab.
And then we wanted to give a quick shout out to not pinball games that are pinball video games. So there's a lot of good selections here. Sonic Spinball, a lot of stuff on portable that's really fun. And then you mentioned Yoku's Island Express, which is it a Metroidvania?
It's a pinball mechanic Metroidvania, yes. But yeah, I think the main thing that is relevant here to our discussion is Sonic Spinball, which is kind of awful, but if you're willing to work with it, there's an interesting experience there. They had, I want to say, like 6 months to make this whole game, so it chugs. But there's like a whole interconnected overworld in this game that is interconnected by pinball, and Sonic can stop being pinball and like walk around and jump around to get between different parts of the board as necessary. And there's also boss fights and all that. It's pretty cool.
And then real quick, some stages in video games that use pinball theming and or elements. So we've got like Casino Park and Bingo Highway from Sonic Heroes, Casinopolis stage from Sonic Adventure DX, and you know what this next one is. Waluigi Pinball from Mario Kart DS 7, 8 Deluxe, and Tour.
Oh, it's...
Also, where's Space Pinball from Windows 8?
That's a good one too. Space Pinball from Windows XP. This panel was going to be too big for us to cover everything, so interested to hear thoughts about it, but we are at time. Thank you so much for coming to spend the afternoon with us. If you would like to learn more, we have a QR code with a bunch of good reading and videos and resources, as well as places you can play virtual renditions of pinball tables, or there's a pinball finder app where you can find tables near you.